Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is another edition of Local Author Series. Today, I have Carolyn Rhodes. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine, Ron. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. She's the author of Library Girls. And since I'm a librarian, this is one I have a particular interest in. It's very interesting, and we'll talk more about this later. But first, Carolyn,
Yes.
for those who may not know you, tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, first of all, I will say that my memoir will tell you half the story of my life. So I'm going to do that for anyone who's going to read the book because I don't want to spoil everything. But I moved to Alabama in about 25 years ago. And I just needed a less stressful life after my husband had passed away. My son and I just packed up the car and took a chance. I have a close friend in a small town, and we moved into that small town after I got a promise for a job at the University of Alabama. Since then, I retired from the University of Alabama, and I'm working as a volunteer for OLLI, which is the Osher Lifelong Learning Center, where I'm teaching arthritis exercises and awareness. And I also take classes there and gave my first Zoom presentation. It wasn't easy, but somehow we all got on the same track and it worked out quite well. Uh, I'm also now working on my website, Library Girls of New York. It's not completely finished, but I do have a few things going on it. So that's one thing. And my favorite thing to do is line dancing besides writing. So I try to keep fit between the exercise classes that I teach my students, and I try to work with them on them and do some breathing exercises, very important. And and my line dancing friends I miss a lot, but I've been looking on YouTube and we've been getting together in that way. So I can't wait to get back to it again.
So, like you said, that's only a quarter of your life because there's
Yeah,
a lot that's left in this book.
yeah.
So, The Library Girls of New York is an interesting read on its own, but it's also packed full of details and supporting documentation, such as photographs. And you also had correspondence between your father and the library director. So, were these items things that your family archived throughout the years, or did you have to work with librarians to acquire these items?
Well, as a librarian, I'm going to tell you first that the librarians are such a major part of getting an education. And I never thought that I would find out as much as I did because I had no idea really what I was going to write. After
Mhm.
50 years, I looked at photos. I called my sisters, do you have photos? What have you got? Because I know I wanted to amass interesting things after having been a writer for years. I mean, I've published many things, but you know, when you start looking at your own life and writing a memoir,
Mhm.
which I really didn't want it to be about me specifically. I wanted it more to be about the years of living in the library, growing up there, and the things that were going on at the time. And as it turns out, I found out that there are even more things going on now in these days. So history never stops. That's basically what I wanted to say. Um, give you a couple of other interesting things. Here, I decided to put this in my final chapter. This is from the 50th celebration of the New York Public Library. It is a bronze medallion, and one side is knowledge, the other side is power. So, and hope. I'm sorry, hope more than power. Um, and my dad saved these. These were his treasures because he just loved working for the library and knowing that his daughters had dibs on just about anything to the library and get. The other thing I wanted to show you too is some of the research, aside from our wonderful librarians, I got online to ask a librarian questions. And you'll hear a little bit more about that when I read the section on Carl Sandburg. Um, this book I bought one day. I was on Amazon just looking for library stuff, what I didn't know and what did I want to put in the book. And I came across this photo. in this beautiful book, Interior Landmarks, Treasures of New York. Oh, I just loved all the treasures. And of course, most of them I know because I've lived there for so long. But this picture really got my attention. Yes, that's right. It is the cover of my book. And I put the picture into the book. My publisher called me a few days later and she said, well, I know this is crazy, but I want to use that as the cover. Eastie Lambert Brown, she is my publisher at Borgo Publishing. I thought it was just a fine idea, but I knew better as a writer that I was going to have to find out if the photographer was going to let me use it on my book. So that was a whole other thing too. Everything was serendipity going all the way from the beginning to the end. So many surprises. I did get him to let me use it for a price. So, but it was worth it because it was the only picture really that I would have said could go on the front cover other than maybe the picture of me and my three sisters. And then of course too, there is the Library of Congress, another book that got my interest because I have signed up and my book is sitting in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
That's
So I
amazing.
look at this and see all of these Art Nouveau, which of course I love, but the Art Nouveau photos. And this is a huge library and I can't wait to get there. Yes, this is it. I believe that Alabama has a Library of Congress too. I'm not sure, but
Well, yeah,
yes,
there's the Department of Archives and History in Montgomery.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's, and I've seen some video on that. That's absolutely beautiful. So these are all really important things. And then the last but not least, I didn't put too much in the book, but this was another thing that I got when, when we divvied up all the things from home. I just took this book. And why would I take the book? Well, it was signed by Brooke Astor, who was a very famous philanthropist and years ago. Here you go in the front cover. And guess what? This was also a gift for the 75th celebration of the New York Public Library. And there are the names of the three most important people, specifically at that time in 1985. I'm going to just show you one more page here too, because I'm so happy that you actually realize how important the documentation is in this book,
Mhm.
even more so than my story. But some people thought it was autobiography. That's okay. But I just love the history and learning along the way about my life
Yes.
that I've totally forgotten about. Well, this is one of the pictures in there. It's the Lady of the Bath. That picture will be in my book. I'm not going to show anybody now because of course they need to buy the book to see it. But my dad started out in the New York Public Library washing the statues. This was like, you know, Depression time and he was happy to get a job. And he's up on the ladder. You've seen the picture. I'm not going to say too
Mhm.
much more about it, but he was washing that statue. And it caught the eye of a journalist photographer who took the photo. They didn't mention his name, but my mom wrote up at the top, Joseph Mitchell, 1937. That's kind of what they did anyway in the old days. Even if they bought a book, you know, they put their name in it and the date. Very, very important stuff. And I could go on, but I think I'll stop right there. So we only have so much time.
So let's talk about your life actually living in the library, which I'm sure was a very unusual thing to tell people. So what was your average day like? What did you and your sisters do for
Oh,
fun?
yeah.
Just talk a bit more about that.
Growing up on Tompkins Square, which is now, by the way, the historic district of Tompkins Square, which was another serendipitous moment because I was like, what? My neighborhood is a historic district landmark for perpetuity? Oh, this is just, you know, to me, it just became more and more evident that I was getting the message that these stories had to get out there.
Mhm.
Um, but we had a great time on the weekends. We played in the library, everything from hide and seek to bike riding. We would actually bike through and around the tables and, occasionally fall and hurt ourselves, but that we'd have to keep quiet because if Dad found out that we hurt ourselves, that would be it, wouldn't be able to bike anymore.
Mhm.
Listening to the records in the record room, and they had all the musicals. Oh, I loved all the musicals. Every time a musical show came out, Showboat, there's so many just running through my mind now, but some of my most favorite things, and I wasn't a singer, but I would just like pretend I could sing, and kind of like, which of course wasn't a word then anyway, like so many words aren't. But my dad bought Helen a piano up in the banquet room that was up on the third floor where we lived, adjacent to our apartment. So Helen got her piano lessons every Sunday morning because the library was completely closed Sundays and they closed early on Saturdays. So that was the time we could just run the place and look at books, magazines. Of course, I was the youngest, so my sisters always took me downstairs, read all the Disney character movies, the books on Snow White. Bambi, of course, was my favorite. And then when we got to see it in the movies, it was just all of those Disney books, that became Disney movies, were just, that was it. You could just fall into it. And we just finally got Technicolor, color by Technicolor. So everything was really exciting. And being the youngest, I had my two sisters always watching out for me. And people wanted to know, you live in the library? That's what they call it, the library. And sometimes the boys would follow me home from school. And one time, one of them went into the library and I said, Daddy, somebody's following me and he's screaming at me. And then my father showed up like almost immediately, and took him by the collar. Of course, today he'd probably be arrested for that. But took him by the collar, moved him out to the vestibule of the library. And I don't know what he told him, but that was the last time that boy ever bothered me again. He said he just liked me. So little stories like that are captured, there's like the heart and soul of the city from when my parents first met, the 1930s. And I wanted to bring that in because I just feel like that was important, introducing who they were and, where they came from. And then moving to East 10th Street, it was the immigrants. And then moving to beautiful Staten Island and having this gorgeous library up on a hill looking out over the bay. I mean, who wouldn't write poetry? Yeah.
So that actually, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say Carnegie was actually the first person I had to talk about in the preface because he was the one who gave a lot of money, millions of dollars to the library to get the masses to have this beautiful institution. And that's how it all began. Well, actually, it began with Governor Tilden of New York, who also gave his life savings to the library. And I think basically that went to building it, and Italy was running out of pink marble. That was marble in New York City with the skyscrapers and all these beautiful architectural buildings. But anyway.
So that actually segues into my next question. New York is a very diverse city, and you lived there as it was going through drastic changes over the decades. So what changes did the library make with New York as it was growing and finding its identity? How did the library system change over that time?
Amazingly enough, when I began my life and began a library girl life with my sisters and everybody else growing up with me, you would have to go to the library. You would have to open up the oak drawers and you would have to thumb through these little papers and then you'd get the number. It took a little bit of brain work excuse me, to get some of this going. And then you could walk over, and of course you have to ask a librarian because you don't exactly know where A99913 is. librarian would help you and take you there. But anytime you had a question, of course, you just go to the librarian's desk and you could sit down and chat with that librarian, ask them how to find something or what you thought you were looking for, especially in papers that we had to write for school. And my high school, well, going back to high school now, the Staten Island High School, it was a very academic school at that time. And we had a lot of papers and we had to really write and know what we were doing.
Mhm.
So the librarians were really important to us. And of course, now we've got audiobooks, magazines, Zoom, event spaces. Yes, when we were younger, we did have famous people coming, like Carl Sandburg, for example. But now events for libraries, they have more spaces open for general public to come in and hear interesting talks on everything from art to whatever's going on politically. And the one great thing is that all of the libraries have gone above and beyond with modern technology. And I know that they have had so many philanthropists giving money to each and every branch within the entire country
Mhm.
to actually get all of those setups, to have computers available to people who don't even really know how to use them. A lot of people in my age group do not. And even younger people who don't have access to these things at home. And they have a place where they can go learn and grow. Um, I think it's just amazing. And of course, I loved using it for my book too, because I could go right onto the digital collection of NYPL and like, let me see if there's a cool picture I can use for my book. As I was getting deeper into it, I wanted to see what was going on in that entire area. Why was it a historic district all of a sudden? I didn't really care about the history. I was just a little girl growing up, playing in the park, getting dirty, going home, mom's cooking, and it was fairly simple life. Um, and honestly, writing a note to a librarian you don't even know who's a research librarian. I was quite shocked, by the way. I thought it would take about a month and a half to get information back. Within 4 days, I wrote a note. I don't know that it was even that detailed, but I was looking for this film, which I'll be discussing in the Amber section. I know this sounds crazy. It's called The Impressionable Years. And I'm just wondering if does anyone actually have it? Because we were told it was completely disintegrated, gone. But I wanted to double check and make sure. And as it turned out, it wasn't gone at all. It had been fixed by the Tisch School of Art at New York University. And they even put my section back in, which was originally taken out. So um, I hope everyone really gets into the internet and gets into learning how to use it. They can go to your library and sign up for
Yes.
classes. And you really need that. I really think that if you're going to be a writer, a teacher, whatever, you really have to know how to use it and use it like for everything and anything that you can. Don't trust it 100%, but you can get your information from a
Mhm.
librarian anytime. So once again, the librarians have just come into, to me, they're heroes and people and kids and adults should really appreciate them beyond what they do, because I think a lot of people take advantage of, oh, where's this? Instead of finding it themselves, where is this? Where is that? Well, why not go to that? Oh, I couldn't find it. So, you know, uh, librarians are there for a reason. Even with all the technology, you still need a librarian to get you to where you need to go. So,
That is absolutely correct. You definitely need to be the spokesperson for the American Library Association. I'll tell them to hire you, but shifting on.
it, now that you mentioned the library association, that was the first article I wrote about living in the library. And I had
Mm.
just kind of begun my writing career kind of part-time then. And I sent them the editor. Well, they're a very literary magazine. I don't know if they're going to want my story. But then I noticed that they had a little section in there for history. So I sent the editor a note, and a couple of weeks later, she said, "Oh, we love that story. Write it, told me what to do, how many words to write." And I sent that story in with the picture of me and my three sisters wearing the same suit. I think it's in my book somewhere. I know it is. The same suit. And I mean, you know, just amazing. So many amazing things that went on with this book.
So now let's actually get into the book. You mentioned the section that you're going to be reading today, impressionable years, and like I said, it was personally my favorite section of the book, and I think everyone will find it interesting as well. So give
Yeah.
me a moment to allow me to cast it to the screen, and we can start whenever you're ready.
The impressionable years. It was 1952. The United States was in a continued Cold War with the Soviet Union. Harry Truman was president. My uncle Al was at the 38th parallel during the Korean War, and Herman Wouk won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for his war story, The Caine Mutiny, soon to become a movie. And sometime during that year, I would be cast in the film The Impressionable Years. Films were a big event, just like theater. We looked forward to going to the movies once a week on Dad's day off. I fell in love with movie stars like Lucille Ball, Anne Francis, Judy Garland, Jane Powell, Debbie Reynolds, Barbara Stanwyck, Liz Taylor, of course, and Gene Simmons. My favorite nonfiction movie that year was Jane Froman's Life Story with Rita Hayworth. I memorized the words to the hit song With a Song in My Heart. Foreman was a singer who was crippled in a plane crash, yet made a heroic comeback. She sang for troops during World War II and fell in love with a Navy pilot. Such drama was a tearjerker for a young girl. In 1952, word got around that the New York Public Library was about to make a documentary film of its own. It was to go around the world to every library. There was a lot of excitement generated, especially among the NYPL employees who had young children. The film director was looking for an actress around 6 to 8 years old. Dad came home one evening excited that auditions would be at the main branch. The librarians at our branch, Tompkins Square, told Dad he had to send their little library girl, me, to audition for the part. I was in the perfect age range. All librarians were excited about the audition. They cheered me on that day. "Carolyn, we hope you get the main role. Good luck." My imagination took me places I would never have thought possible. Imagine me in a film that would travel to every corner of the world's libraries. I would play the starring role. Then I could be discovered by a Hollywood producer, just like famous actress Lana Turner, who was discovered in a California soda shop. She was only 16 years old, so I had the next 8 years to learn how to act. I would audition, and Mom could tell them all about my experience. I had performed as a ballerina in Swan Lake at the Christodora House on Avenue B about 2 years before. I won a second place in Little Bo Peep contest at Tompkins Square Park, and I hoped Mom would not forget to tell them I got the lead role at camp for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which I couldn't perform because I got poison ivy. And I wondered if getting a photo with the roller derby at Tompkins Square Park might matter. The auditions were held at the NYPL main library at 42nd and 5th. I sat on a bench, which I believe was the opening scene of The Impressionable Years. I didn't have to speak or memorize anything. We understood there would be a narrator as the girl wanders through the New York Public Library branches. Throughout the film, the girl's star walks into book signings, picks up a book of her own, and opens a new library card. This recollection is from my memory of the filming so many decades ago. In one scene, the star happens upon a gathering of children listening to the poetry of Carl Sandburg, a folk musician too. as he played a ukulele or banjo. Carl Sandburg won 3 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 in poetry, one on Abe Lincoln. He was also honored by the Poetry Society of America with a gold medal for distinguished achievement. I didn't get the main role, but was excited to be in one scene right in my own Tompkins Square library. Mr. Sandburg was no stranger to showing up at many libraries. He was an entertainer, loved children, and wrote many books. My family and the librarians were disappointed that I didn't get the main role, but the smaller role was the most important scene, I concluded. It was the best part, playing me. In my scene, I joined a group of children at the branch. We listened intently to the famous poet, a good-looking fellow with movie star ratings and an author who won many prizes for literature. It was the best few minutes of the entire film, I'm sure. I remember that childhood moment, what I wore, and my total immersion into Sandberg's aura. My eyes opened wide as I watched filmmakers who said, look into the big lens and act natural. Several librarians prepared for the scene. Dad placed the children's room chairs in the area, and Mr. Sandberg was tuning in his instrument as he smiled at the children present. There was a lot of film equipment and cameras ready to roll. Everyone scrambled around to add the final touches of magic. I was called into the reading group by one of our Tompkins Square librarians. About to take a back seat, I heard a commanding voice. Where's Mr. Mitchell's library girl, Carolyn? Carl Sandburg said with a smile and a deep voice. Hello, Carolyn. Do you like poetry? Well, my favorite poem was If by Rudyard Kipling at that time. I smiled and said, yes. I don't know if the camera was rolling yet. He then asked, can you sit on my lap while I tell everyone here a little story about my farm? Well, I found out later that he had moved to his new home, a farm in North Carolina, in 1952. When the filming began for my scene, everyone was quiet. People were crowding in to get a close look at the filming as the filming began. Dad handled the crowds. Sandberg tuned his ukulele and chose me to sit on his lap while he read Buffalo Bill and Chicago from his books of poetry. The cameras rolled, and I have one visual in my mind of that scene. I looked at him being so close up and knew I was in the presence of a down-to-earth man despite his fame as a folk singer and an author. He was a storyteller. Sandberg enjoyed entertaining, reading and singing for children, and did so quite often around libraries and at his farmhouse, now a National Historic Site in North Carolina. He made himself at home in the libraries of America. In the 1960s, some 14 years later, when we lived at the St. George Branch in Staten Island, Dad tried to obtain the film. He was told the film was in a state of disrepair and the reel was not available. We were told that the entire section of the film with Carl Sandburg's poetry reading was cut out because that part of the tape had to be spliced due to fraying. We assumed that the trips it made around the world no doubt killed the footage. In those days, films had to be carefully stored, and to preserve them was a monumental task. Even poor ventilation could destroy the best of Hollywood films. We were so sad to hear it. Upon doing some research, however, for this memoir, I tried again to find out if any of the film had been salvaged. I found out from the reference librarian in the moving image section of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., that the film existed. That librarian then referred me to the reference librarian at the New York Public Library's main branch. Within a few days, she located it for me. Technology may have had a hand in putting it all together, quite miraculously. I found out that the St. George Staten Island branch librarians were right at the time. The film was in a state of non-repair. However, I got a pleasant surprise. The NYPL research librarian wrote me an email stating that 2 versions of the film had been restored. One is 40 minutes with Carl Sandburg, with me, hopefully. The other version is 30 minutes without Carl Sandburg at Tompkins Square Branch. It was restored by New York University's Tisch School of Arts, and not too long ago found its way to the archives of the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center, the Dorothy and Louis B. Coleman Center at 40 Lincoln Center Plaza. The Performing Arts Center opened in 1971. Coincidentally, I used that new library for the performing arts for a Renaissance medieval dance project in my senior year of college. I loved going there. Next door is the Metropolitan Opera House, and in the same square, the David Giffen Hall, Avery Hall in 1974 when I was there, where I would one day perform. The impressionable years influenced my life, and the story of Carl Sandburg and me on his lap was a kitchen table story throughout the years, even as recently as the writing of this memoir. With thanks to a new class of filmmakers who took the challenge to restore this piece of history, I couldn't be happier that its new home is at the Lincoln Center Library for Performing Arts. I often wondered over the decades how many countries had a presentation of the impressionable years. Was it narrated in other languages? I'll find out on my next visit to New York City. Or perhaps I'll ask a research librarian first.
So yeah, that's definitely the most interesting part of the story. I did not expect a cameo from Carl Sandburg when I picked up this book, so that was a pleasant surprise.
Oh
So
yes, that was
so
just
just like
story.
the that reel of footage travel, you have traveled a lot as well. And we're going to fast forward a bit
Yeah.
here because, like I said, there's plenty we could talk about in your life. But um, so so after high school, you moved to San Francisco, which was a major move at the time. Was your family anxious at all about the cross country move?
Oh my goodness. In those days, actually it was a few years after high school, because after high school, I didn't go directly to college and moved into the city and moved back home. It was a kind of back and forth thing
Mhm.
growing up after high school. But I was doing a lot of dancing, and I was teaching ballroom dancing at the time. And I loved doing that, but I also had to do a lot of temporary part-time jobs, which kind of helped me a lot when I finally got to San Francisco, because my friend and I traveled all the way across the United States. That was my first real long car trip, because my family and I didn't travel other than maybe, New York State. We got in the car. That was our main, travel thing. Um, but yes, my mom was absolutely hysterical. She just was worried that we were getting in a car and driving 2 girls by themselves. Like, Mom, what could happen? Oh, I don't know. All the possibilities. Well, we just decided that since my friend's dad bought her a brand new Volkswagen, a red Volkswagen, she had just graduated from college, and she said, "Well, even if you don't work, maybe I should at least get a job." And I said, "Okay, well, that's good." And yeah, it was really tough on them because they didn't like the idea that their girls were traveling the world, really. By that, Helen and Irene were already traveling. They were living in Paris. Irene was 2 school teachers who had the summers off. You
Mhm.
can imagine they were
Right.
traveling all over the country. And, Helen spoke French and Irene speaks fluent Spanish. So they were already at their destinations. I was just trying to find mine and have a little fun, because I heard that flower power was big in San Francisco. We decided to put some flowers in our hair and drive there. We had no idea where we were going to live. We just did it. And of course, in those days, you could rent a beautiful floor through apartment overlooking the Presidio and Sausalito and the bridge for like $350 a month. Now it's about $3,500 a month. So I may not be going to San Francisco anytime. Um, but it was really a way of getting out on your own and learning whether or not you were going to like this. And while some of your friends were already getting married, I had just turned 21 and I decided, not that I didn't want to get married, I just decided I wanted to see the world a little bit and, just get out there. I guess that was kind of like what the boys were allowed to do, but the girls in the early 60s, not so much.
Mm.
But that was okay. A bunch of us were, just kind of hanging in with these little movements that were going on. Like, we deserve to have a life first before we get married. So that's a really interesting chapter too, I think. Being innocent and young and just eyes wide open, saying, "Here I am, world. I'm young. I can do anything, and I can even get a job." Okay, the jobs I got weren't that great. I answered phones, and I could type a little bit, but I didn't know how to really put a letter together. So, and my friend got a job with a company doing something else. I don't know what she was doing at that time, but yeah, it was a really good experience. And so I experienced flower power and I was finally glad to get back to St. George, Staten Island, on to the next thing. So, yeah.
So that leads to my next question. Moving from New York, which is pretty much a city comprised of like smaller cities, like your own neighborhood is a city within itself. Moving from somewhere like that to San Francisco at the height of this cultural movement, how was that different culturally from growing up in New York? Like, did you find it to be like, yeah, how did you find those changes to be?
Oh, I found them to be absolutely rough, really rough. Uh, I mean, I've read a few things about cultural differences, but you don't know what it's really like until you experience it.
Mhm.
And the Southern culture is so much different than the North, um, just in everything, the way people think, even our language, even our little, first time I heard someone at the University of Alabama while I was working at the College of Business then, and she said to me one day, I said, "Well, did you want me to finish this project, whatever it was?" And then she said, "Well, I might could." Well, she like a problem with the English language. I had no idea that people just said that. It just
Yeah,
meant something.
it's a totally different language.
When I first moved to Utah, Alabama, uh, they 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 had their own little kind of little sayings like, "Oh, she's so precious," and "bless her heart." And I
Mhm.
thought that was so sweet and kind. But then I understood eventually, I got to understand the significance of bless your heart. Didn't exactly mean what I thought. So there's a lot of different changes, but I would never go back and undo it. I really loved having my 25 years here. Well, especially now that we have technology, and I am in touch with everyone that I once knew in high school. I mean, we can connect on Zoom, we can talk, we do the Facebook thing. I mean, we're all into staying connected, which is the one thing I really love about technology, that it just does brings us together and it helps us find people that we haven't seen in ages.
Mhm.
So um, but I kind of like now having all the technology, and it's a much calmer lifestyle. um, I don't know what I would have done had I stayed in New York, because one of the things, as I said, is that it's, you get an apartment, but it's not a beautiful apartment like you would get here,
Mm.
same price. So all the things that I looked for here, not everything, but a lot of the things I felt were important as a single mother to bring up a son, was very good. And it was good for my son because he had a chance to learn baseball, football. I mean, you name it, you know, nice people who who shared, like the golf course in Utah. He had friends, his parents, were part of the country club, and he was always invited to go to these places and meet new people. So he had some hard times too. A couple of kids beat him up a few times because he was. They called him all kinds of New York crazy names. He said that, no, I'm just me, but it's hard to explain that to kids.
Mhm.
But that was okay because he learned how to stand up for himself, you know. So, so I'm still glad to be in here, and I have a house which I would have never gotten on my own. You know, uh, so it all worked out as things seem to normally do.
Yes, I feel that too. They always work out. But yeah, as a librarian, I personally want to thank you for recording this story because, particularly as a reference librarian, I'll always preach to people, make sure you record your story, record your history. It may not seem important to you, but trust me, it's going to seem important later. So I want to talk about what compelled you to write this memoir first, and secondly, let's talk about the importance of finding a community such as Twig to help you, push, push the story along and make you realize that it actually is something worth writing.
Oh, absolutely. Um, I knew as a writer of articles and essays, this was not going to be an easy project. Now I know some people say, "Oh, just write your book and get it out there," but I think it's a lot more you have to do. You have to start somewhere, even if, like you said, scratch a few things in a journal every day, write something, and then you'd be surprised years later how that might just come in handy, which is something I scratched little notes in when I was in high school, little poems that I wrote. Not that I thought I was ever going to bring them with me, but I did. And it brought me back to an emotional state of mind, and I think that's the important thing. And then, learn how to write, learn a little bit of technique before. I'm not saying don't write, but learn that there is a major technique involved. If you have the talent, and almost everybody does with their life stories, just learn the technique of writing so that people will want to read it. And yes, you need to get an editor with your book. I learned a lot of these things with Twig. Um, we'd have our monthly meetings, and we're all so supportive of each other, as I know your other guests have mentioned to you. Uh, we're very important to each other. And I remember the most stunning thing about it was when I had just published the book and we were meeting for lunch one day, uh, just for a general meeting. And when I walked into the restaurant, I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit late. I didn't know what I was doing, but had finally gotten there." And they all clapped for me and said, "Congratulations, you did publish your book." That made me feel so great that, yes, that's right. This was really a good thing to do. And honestly, they were very important in me moving along and taking little classes and learning about, well, of course, after you write your book, then you've got to deal with publishing it. So it's been handy for that. And Eastie from Borgo, Ernest, and Hadley Booksellers, she gave a class. Actually, it was a class with OLLI, and how to publish your book, or when should you publish your book. And I immediately jumped on that because I thought, I just wanted to be discouraged in the beginning because I knew this is going to take a while to do. Um, but actually, after taking her course, I was quite encouraged, to go on, and we would all, like we do with Twig, there were about 8 of us, and we would all read what we were going to put into our books, and everybody commented on them. And Eastie gave us some wonderful ideas about how to get started and what to do and what to think about when you're publishing your book. So half of it is writing it, and half of it is actually, some of it is publishing, and all the rest of it is social media for the rest of your days on this earth. You really have to let people know you've got something important you want them to read, you know. And I've sold quite a few copies already. I haven't even really hit the New York market other than through Facebook and the high school friends that I know. Everybody bought a book that I knew. And anyone who didn't, I said, oh, did you miss my book? So these things that you really just have to do, you know. And Twig, they've always been fantastic as far as any of us needing any kind of help. Of course, Carolyn and Jim, as you know, always send us the minutes every week. And if you have something you want to ask them, they're always available. So I recommend to everyone who wants to write, even if you've never written one sentence, come and join us. It's Saturdays at the Tuscaloosa Public Library where we meet. And you can talk about what you think you might want to write and where to begin. I began on a blank page. I never wrote a book. So it made it really tough. Like, where do I start? What story? I had no idea until you start doing the research and learning all these incredible things that, of course, the history was moving along with me, but I never paid much attention to it until I started reading about it 50 years later. And wow, I've got it. I mean, both places, St. George, Staten Island, as well as the Tompkins Square Branch, they are both historic landmarks. The area that I lived in, my high school, the whole complete area is historic now. So that's pretty neat too.
That is pretty neat.
In an historic district, two historic districts, yeah. I knew I had a story, but yeah. I hope everybody gets a chance to read it too.
So for those wanting to read this story, where can they buy a copy?
Okay, well, they can go to borgopublishing.com, who is my publisher. But if you can't remember that, you can go straight on to Amazon or send me an email to writegems@gmail. WRITEMS. That's it.
All right, so I had a lot of fun. That's all I have. Do you have any closing remarks?
Just to anyone listening, enjoy your library, and if you have extra money, donate it.
I think I think that is a perfect note to close on. So thank you for your time, Carolyn.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.